I stopped by my daughter's place without warning on a stormy Tuesday night. She was asleep on the floor by the front door, curled up in old ripped clothes like a stray dog. Before I could knock, her husband walked in. He did not help her up. He did not cover her with a blanket. He wiped his muddy Italian leather shoes on her dress and told his guests she was just the crazy servant. I did not yell. I did not throw a punch. I stepped back into the shadows and reached for my phone. What I did next cost him his job, his reputation, and his freedom in less than 24 hours. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that nobody should ever get away with hurting your family. The rain in Connecticut does not wash things clean. It only exposes the dirt. The storm was hammering against the roof of the taxi as I paid the driver. I told him to keep the change and not to wait. I wanted to surprise my daughter, Sarah. It had been 6 months since I last saw her. 6 months of short phone calls and strange excuses why she could not visit me in Florida. I stood before the massive oak double doors of the villa. It was a magnificent house. It should be. I was the one who paid for the down payment, though Jason, my son-in-law, told everyone it was from his genius stock trading. I adjusted my wet coat and prepared a smile. I expected a warm hug. I expected the smell of dinner. I expected to see my little girl happy. I walked up the stone steps and raised my hand to knock, but something stopped me. Through the tall glass panel next to the door, I could see into the foyer. The crystal chandelier was dim, but there was enough light to see the figure on the floor. My heart stopped. It was not a pile of laundry. It was Sarah. My beautiful, brilliant Sarah, who had graduated with honors and dreamed of opening an art gallery. Now she was curled in a fetal position on the cold marble tiles. She was wearing a gray dress that looked like a cleaning rag. It was stained and torn at the hem. Her hair was matted, and even in her sleep, her face was twisted in distress. She was clutching a dirty mop as if it were a teddy bear. Why was she sleeping on the floor? Why was she dressed like that? My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. I was about to break that door down and demand answers, but then bright lights swept across the driveway. The roar of a high-performance engine cut through the sound of the rain. A black Porsche pulled up right behind where the taxi had been. It was Jason. My old instincts kicked in. The instincts that helped me survive 30 years in the cutthroat world of venture capital. Never show your hand until you know the whole game. If I walked in now, Jason would have a polished lie ready. He would say she fell. He would say it was an accident. I needed to see the truth. Bang. I stepped back from the door and pressed myself into the dark alcove behind a large decorative pillar. The rain soaked through my shirt, chilling my old bones, but my blood was boiling hot. I watched as Jason stepped out of the car. He was not alone. 3 men in expensive suits climbed out with him, laughing loud enough to be heard over the thunder. They were drunk on expensive scotch and their own arrogance. Jason led them up the stairs. He looked like a king returning to his castle. He did not know that the true king was standing 3 feet away in the shadows, watching every move. He keyed in the code and the heavy door swung open. The cold wind blew into the house, but Sarah did not move. She was in a deep, unnatural sleep. Jason stepped inside. He looked down at his wife. He did not check if she was breathing. He turned to his guests with a cruel smirk and said something that made my hands clench into fists. "Watch the shoes, boys. The help is slacking off again." Then he placed his muddy sole directly onto her shoulder and pushed. The heavy oak door swung open and laughter spilled into the hallway. It was a sharp and jagged sound that felt violent against the silence of the storm outside. Jason walked in first. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. Behind him were 3 men. I recognized the type immediately. They were investors, sharks in silk ties. They reeked of expensive scotch and the arrogance that comes from having too much money and too little conscience. They were too busy admiring the crystal chandelier and the marble floors to notice the woman curled up on the rug. They were talking about stock options and quarterly projections, their voices booming in the cavernous foyer. Then Jason stopped. He looked down. A normal husband would have dropped to his knees in panic. A normal man would have screamed for a doctor. Jason just sighed. It was a sigh of deep inconvenience, as if he had found a piece of trash that the wind had blown into his pristine castle. He looked at his shoes. They were Italian leather, handcrafted and currently caked with thick, wet mud from the driveway. He looked at the floor, then he looked at Sarah. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He did not want to ruin his expensive imported rug. He needed a place to clean his feet. I stopped breathing as I watched him lift his right foot. He did not hesitate. He placed his heavy, muddy sole directly onto the sleeve of Sarah's dress. He pressed down. He twisted his foot back and forth, grinding the dirt into the fabric, scraping the mud off his shoe and onto the shoulder of the woman he had vowed to cherish. Sarah did not scream. She did not pull away. She let out a low, weak moan, a sound so full of despair it almost brought me to my knees. Her eyes fluttered open, but they were glassy and vacant. They were not the eyes of my daughter. They were two empty windows. The drugs he had pumped into her system had severed her connection to reality, leaving her a prisoner in her own body, unable to fight, unable to speak, unable to do anything but accept the abuse. One of the guests finally noticed. He froze his glass of whiskey, pausing halfway to his mouth. "Jesus, Jason," he stammered, taking a step back. "That is a person. What are you doing?" The hallway went deadly silent. For a heartbeat, I thought humanity might prevail. I thought someone would intervene. But Jason just laughed. It was a cold, practiced sound. "Relax, gentlemen," he said casually, lifting his other foot to wipe it on the hem of her skirt. "Do not let her startle you. This is just the help. She is completely insane." He looked at his friends with a conspiratorial wink, as if they were sharing a joke. "She thinks she is a doormat," he continued, his voice dripping with false pity. "We just play along with her delusions. It keeps her calm. It is actually therapeutic for her." The guests looked at each other. They looked at the mud on Sarah's dress. Then slowly, nervously, they chuckled. They accepted the lie because it was easier than facing the horror. They stepped over her body one by one, careful not to get their own shoes dirty, and followed Jason into the living room. Jason kicked Sarah's leg out of the way to close the door, leaving her there like a discarded rag. He thought he was the master of his domain. He thought nobody was watching. He had no idea that the man standing 10 feet away in the shadows was about to turn his world into ash. I stepped out from behind the pillar, and my wet shoes squeaked against the polished marble floor. The sound cut through their laughter like a knife. Jason spun around so fast he nearly spilled his drink. His eyes went wide. For a split second I saw genuine fear on his face. He looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. But the moment passed instantly. As soon as he realized it was just me, just the old man he thought he had defeated years ago, his mask of arrogance slammed back into place. "William," he said, his voice dripping with fake surprise, "you nearly gave me a heart attack. What are you doing lurking in the dark like a ghost?" He did not ask how I was. He did not offer to take my wet coat. He just looked at me with that familiar sneer, the one that said I was nothing more than an insect he had to deal with. Before I could answer, he turned to his friends. The sharks were staring at me, judging my cheap raincoat and my gray hair. Jason saw an opportunity. He saw a chance to turn my presence into a comedy routine to entertain his investors. "Gentlemen," he announced, wrapping an arm around my shoulder, "I want you to meet my father-in-law, William. Please forgive his appearance. He gets a little confused these days." He tapped his temple with his finger, signaling to them that I was crazy. It is tragic, really. The dementia comes and goes. Sometimes he thinks he is still a big-shot businessman. We mostly just keep him around out of pity. He leaned in closer to me, his breath smelling of expensive alcohol. "Let me guess, Dad. You are here for money again. Did you blow through the allowance I sent you?" The guests laughed. It was a cruel, guttural sound. They looked at me with a mixture of amusement and disgust. To them, I was just a senile old leech draining their host's resources. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. I did not push his arm away. I did not shout that I was the one who funded his first startup. I did not scream that the allowance he mentioned was actually the dividends from my own investments that he was stealing. I just stared at him. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for a shred of the man my daughter had fallen in love with. There was nothing there. Just greed and a bottomless void of insecurity. "I am not here for money, Jason," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am here to see Sarah." Jason laughed harder. He slapped his knee. "See Sarah," he said to the group. "That is rich. You see what I mean? He forgets things instantly. I just told him she is indisposed." He looked back at me, his smile vanishing, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "Sarah is sleeping, William. And frankly, you are embarrassing me. Go to the kitchen and wait there. Maybe the cook has some leftovers for you. If you are good, I might write you a check for your bus fare home." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, like I was a beggar on the street, and led his guests into the living room, leaving me standing alone in the cold foyer. I stood in the narrow doorway between the kitchen and the living room. My hands were gripping the doorframe so hard that my knuckles turned white. The smell of roasted lamb and expensive cigars filled the air, but my stomach was twisting in knots. Inside the room, Jason was holding court like a king. He was sitting on the velvet sofa with a glass of whiskey in one hand. Sitting dangerously close to him was a woman I recognized immediately. Amanda. She was his executive assistant on paper, but everyone in the room knew she was much more than that. She was wearing a tight red dress and looking at my daughter with eyes full of cold, predatory malice. Jason snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp and demanding. Sarah flinched as if she had been whipped. "Get the guests some sparkling water," he ordered, "and try not to mess it up this time." Sarah nodded slowly. Her movements were sluggish and heavy. The drugs were making her motor skills fail, but she was trying so hard to obey. She picked up a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal glasses. Her arms were trembling under the weight. She looked so small and fragile in that gray rag of a dress, surrounded by people in designer suits who looked at her like she was a circus animal. She began to walk toward the guests. She was moving carefully, watching her feet. She had to pass the sofa where Jason and Amanda were sitting. As Sarah approached, I saw Amanda shift her position. It was a subtle movement, a small, calculated extension of her leg. She stuck her foot out right into Sarah's path. It was not an accident. It was a trap. Sarah never saw it coming. Her foot caught on Amanda's high heel. She pitched forward. Time seemed to slow down. I watched helplessly as my daughter fell. The tray flew from her hands. Crystal shattered against the hardwood floor with the sound of a gunshot. Water and ice splashed everywhere, soaking the expensive Persian rug and drenching Amanda's shoes. Sarah hit the floor hard. She landed on her hands and knees, right in the middle of the broken glass. A shard sliced her palm, and I saw a drop of bright red blood mix with the water on the floor. "You clumsy idiot!" Amanda shrieked. She jumped up from the sofa, her face twisted in ugly rage. She did not ask if Sarah was hurt. She did not care about the blood. She pointed at her shoes. "Look what you did! These are Louboutins. You stupid, useless cow." Sarah tried to apologize. She was trembling, trying to push herself up from the wet floor. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Amanda did not accept the apology. She took a step forward and swung her hand. The sound of the slap was louder than the breaking glass. It echoed off the high ceilings. Sarah's head snapped to the side. A bright red handprint bloomed instantly on her pale cheek. She did not cry out. She just slumped back onto her heels, holding her face, waiting for the next blow. The room went silent. I looked at Jason. I expected him to stand up. I expected him to defend his wife. Instead, he looked at Amanda with concern. "I am so sorry, babe," he said to his mistress, ignoring his bleeding wife on the floor. "I will buy you a new pair. Do not let the help ruin your night." He looked at Sarah with pure disgust. "Clean this up," he hissed. "Now, or you are sleeping in the garage." I stepped back into the shadows, my heart pounding, a rhythm of pure war. They had just signed their own death warrants. The last guest walked out into the rain, and the heavy front door clicked shut. Silence returned to the house, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence. The party was over, and the performance was finished. Now the monsters could be themselves. Jason did not help Sarah up from the floor, where she had been cleaning the broken glass. He grabbed her by her thin wrist. He dragged her across the polished marble like a sack of garbage. She did not fight back. The drugs had taken her voice and her strength. He did not take her to the master bedroom. He did not take her to a guest room. He opened a narrow door under the main staircase. It was a storage closet. A dark, windowless space meant for winter coats and umbrellas, not for a human being. He shoved her inside. I heard her body hit the floor. Then came the sound that made my blood freeze, the click of a deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. He locked her in like a dangerous animal. He put the key in his pocket and turned to face me. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking annoyed rather than guilty. "Do not look at me like that, William," he said. "It is for her own safety. She wanders at night. She hurts herself. You saw how clumsy she was with the glass." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of whiskey and expensive cologne. He towered over me, using his height to intimidate. "Listen to me carefully, old man. I know you are feeling sentimental, but if you tell anyone about this, if you call the police or try to be a hero, I will have her committed to a state facility by morning. I have the medical power of attorney. I have the doctors on my payroll. They will lock her in a padded room and throw away the key. You will never see her again. Do you understand me?" I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump. I made myself look small and defeated. I forced a tremor into my hands. "I understand, Jason," I whispered. "Please do not send her away. I will not say a word." He smirked, satisfied with my submission. "Good. Now go to sleep on the sofa. Do not touch anything valuable." He turned off the main lights, plunging the room into shadows, and walked upstairs. A moment later, I heard Amanda giggling from the master bedroom, followed by the slam of their door. I waited in the dark. I stood perfectly still, counting the beats of my own heart. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Only when the house was completely silent did I move. I reached into the hidden lining of my old raincoat. I pulled out my phone. To the naked eye, it looked like a cheap burner phone from a convenience store, but it was encrypted with military-grade software. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I did not need to write a long explanation. My lawyer, Leonard Cole, already had the preliminary files. He just needed the signal to release the hounds. I typed 2 words. "Clean sweep." I hit send. The screen glowed blue for a second, then went black. The war had officially begun. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only illuminated the dust floating in the living room where I had spent the night. My back ached from the stiff leather sofa, and my neck was stiff. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, trying to push away the image of my daughter locked in that closet like a prisoner. I had not slept more than an hour. Every creak of the house had made me jump, thinking it was Sarah trying to escape. Jason walked in wearing a fresh white shirt and holding a steaming mug of artisanal coffee. He looked like the picture of success. He did not offer me a cup. Instead, he kicked the leg of the sofa hard enough to shake the frame. "Wake up, William. Hotel checkout time was an hour ago." He took a sip of his coffee and looked down at me with a sneer. I stood up, slowly adjusting my wrinkled clothes. I asked him where Sarah was. He ignored the question completely. He walked to the large bay window that overlooked the sprawling back garden. The storm last night had littered the lawn with heavy branches and debris. The grass was overgrown and the hedges were unruly. It was a mess. Jason pointed a manicured finger at the yard. "Since you are planning to mooch off my hospitality for a few days, you need to earn your keep. Nothing in this life is free, William. Not even for family. Especially not for useless family. The landscaping crew charges me $500 a visit. You are going to save me that money today." I looked at the vast expanse of green. It was at least 2 acres. At 72 years old, with a bad back and a heart condition on my medical file, this was not just a chore. It was a punishment. It was a physical test meant to break my spirit. "There is an old push mower in the shed," Jason continued. "Use that. The riding mower is for authorized personnel only, and I do not trust you with expensive machinery." He tossed a pair of dirty, stiff gardening gloves at my chest. They hit me with a thud and fell to the floor. I looked at the gloves, then I looked at him. I could have bought this entire estate 10 times over with the balance of my checking account. I could have ruined him with a single phone call right then and there. My lawyer was just waiting for the word. But the trap was not ready yet. I needed to see how deep his cruelty went. I needed to see if there was any redemption for him. So I swallowed my pride. I bent down and picked up the gloves. "I will do it," I said, my voice raspy from lack of water. Jason smiled. It was the smile of a predator playing with its food. "Good. Make sure you clear the branches first. I want those lines straight, William. Do not embarrass me in front of the neighbors." He turned and walked back to his home office, leaving me to face the humidity and the hard labor. I walked out the back door. The heat hit me instantly. I found the mower. It was rusted and heavy. It took all my strength to pull the cord. As the engine sputtered to life, I looked up at the window. Jason was watching me. He was enjoying this. He thought he had turned a once powerful man into his personal servant. He did not know that while I was cutting the grass, I was also sharpening the blade that would cut him down. My back was throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. 3 hours of pushing a rusted mower under the noon sun had taken its toll on my body, but my mind was sharper than ever. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand as I walked into the kitchen for a glass of tap water. Jason was there eating a sandwich. He did not offer me a bite. He pointed a crumb-covered finger toward the double doors at the end of the hall. "Since you are already sweaty," he said, "you might as well finish the dirty work. Go clean my office. The cleaning lady is sick, and I have a video conference in an hour. Make sure the desk is polished. I want to see my reflection in it." I nodded silently. He thought he was degrading me, treating me like a servant to break my dignity. He did not realize he had just given a fox the keys to the henhouse. I grabbed a rag and a bottle of wood polish from under the sink. I walked down the hall, my steps slow and heavy, playing the part of the tired old man perfectly. But inside my pocket, my fingers curled around a small, flat, black disc. It was a listening device, military grade, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. I entered his office. It was a shrine to his own ego. There were framed magazine covers on the wall, likely paid placements, and awards that looked bought rather than earned. I moved to the massive mahogany desk. It was cluttered with papers. I started wiping the surface, moving things just enough to look busy. I dropped the rag on the floor. With a groan of exertion, I bent down to pick it up. In one smooth motion, I peeled the adhesive back off the device and stuck it deep into the shadows of the knee space under the desk. It was invisible unless you were lying on your back looking up. Just as I stood up, the heavy door banged open. Jason stormed in. He was not looking at me. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. He slammed the door shut and paced the room like a caged animal. "I told you I would have it," he hissed into the phone. His voice was trembling. "Stop threatening me. Do you know who I am?" I froze in the corner, clutching the dust rag. I made myself part of the furniture. Jason was so consumed by fear, he seemed to have forgotten I was there. "I need 2 more days," Jason pleaded, the arrogance completely gone from his tone. "The IPO launches on Friday. Once the stock hits the market, I will have the cash. I will pay you double. Just call off your dogs." He listened for a moment, and I saw all the color drain from his face. He slumped into his leather chair, the phone shaking in his hand. "12 million, he whispered. "Yes, I know the interest rate. I know the consequences. Please, just give me until Friday." He ended the call and dropped the phone on the desk right above where I had planted the bug. He put his head in his hands. I saw him shivering. This was not just business debt. This was blood money. He was in deep with loan sharks, the kind who did not send demand letters but sent men with baseball bats. I continued to polish the bookshelf, my movements silent. Jason finally looked up. He saw me and jumped his eyes wide. "Get out!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get out of here, you useless old fool! Can't you see I am working?" I bowed my head and scurried out of the room. I closed the door behind me and walked down the hall. A small smile touched my lips. Jason Black was not a king. He was a desperate man standing on a trapdoor, and I had just unlocked the latch. I waited until the sound of Jason's luxury sedan faded down the long driveway. The house was finally silent, but it was the silence of a tomb. I went to the kitchen and wrapped a piece of roast chicken and some bread in a napkin. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a rage that was growing hotter with every passing second. I walked softly to the storage closet under the stairs. I knelt on the cold marble floor. There was a small gap between the bottom of the door and the floor. It was barely an inch wide, but it was enough. "Sarah." I whispered, my mouth close to the wood. "Sarah, it is Daddy. I am going to slide some food under the door. You need to eat." For a long moment there was no sound. Then I heard a shuffling noise like dry leaves dragging across concrete. A pale, thin hand appeared in the gap. Her fingers were trembling violently as she clawed at the napkin. I watched her pull the food into the darkness. I heard the sound of her eating fast and desperate like a starving animal. It broke my heart to hear my little girl reduced to this. "Daddy," she whispered back. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was raspy and thick, as if her tongue was too heavy for her mouth. "Daddy, you have to leave. He will hurt you. He told me he would hurt anyone who talks to me." I pressed my forehead against the door. "I am not going anywhere, Sarah. I need you to tell me something. I need you to tell me about the medicine. Jason says you are sick. He says you have episodes. Is that true?" I heard a sob from the other side of the door. "No, Daddy. I was fine. I was happy." Then he started giving me the blue pills. He calls them stabilizers. He stands over me and forces me to swallow them every morning and every night. He checks my mouth to make sure they are gone. She paused, and her breathing hitched. About an hour after I take them, the walls start to melt. I see shadows moving in the corners. My skin feels like it is burning. I try to tell him, but my words come out wrong. I forget things. I forget who I am. Yesterday I forgot my own daughter's name. That was why I was crying on the floor. I am losing my mind, Daddy, but I think he is making it happen. I closed my eyes. Tears leaked out, but I wiped them away angrily. It was not schizophrenia. It was chemical warfare. Jason was systematically destroying her neural pathways, to make her incompetent so he could take power of attorney. It was the most evil thing I had ever heard. "Listen to me, Sarah," I said, my voice fierce and low. "Do not swallow them anymore. Hide them under your tongue. Spit them out when he leaves. I am going to get you out of here, but I need you to be clear-headed. Can you do that for me?" "I will try," she whispered. "Please, Daddy, I am so scared. The shadows are coming back." I touched the wood of the door as if I could transmit my strength through it. "Let them come. I am the monster in the shadows now, and I am going to eat them alive." I stood up. My knees cracked, but I did not feel the pain. I had the confirmation I needed. Now I just needed the proof. The silence in the house was heavy after Jason left for his office. He had warned me not to touch anything, but I was done following orders. I waited by the window until his black Porsche disappeared around the bend of the driveway. Then I moved. I went straight to the master bathroom. I knew that is where a man like Jason would keep his control. He would want the keys to her sanity right next to his shaving cream. I found the orange prescription bottle on the top shelf behind a bottle of expensive cologne. I picked it up. The label read, "Sarah Black. Take 2 tablets twice daily." The prescribing doctor was a name I recognized from my investigations. A man who had lost his medical license in 2 other states before setting up a private practice here. I unscrewed the cap and poured the pills into my palm. They were small and blue. To the untrained eye, they looked like innocent little tablets. But I knew better. These were heavy sedatives mixed with hallucinogens. They were designed to scramble the brain, to make memories fuzzy, and to induce panic. He was feeding my daughter madness twice a day. I reached into my pocket. Before I left Florida, I had packed a bottle of herbal supplements for my joints. By a stroke of luck, or perhaps divine intervention, they were almost the exact same shade of blue. I dumped the real pills into a small plastic bag I had taken from the kitchen. I squeezed the air out of the bag and tucked it deep into my sock. This was not just trash. This was evidence. This was the weapon that would put Jason behind bars for assault with a deadly weapon. I began filling the orange prescription bottle with my herbal supplements. One by one, I dropped them in, clink, clink, clink. With every tablet, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. Tonight, when he forced these down her throat, he would be giving her vitamins. Tonight, the fog in her mind would start to clear. Tonight, she would start to remember who she was. Suddenly, I heard the front door open downstairs. My heart slammed against my ribs. Jason had come back. I had forgotten that he sometimes forgot his briefcase. I screwed the cap back onto the bottle as fast as I could. My fingers felt like they were covered in grease. I shoved the bottle back onto the shelf behind the cologne. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. He was coming up. I was trapped in his bathroom. I flushed the toilet. It was the only thing I could think of. I bent over the sink and turned on the tap, splashing water on my face. The door swung open. Jason stood there. He looked at me with narrow, suspicious eyes. "What are you doing in here, William?" "Use the guest bathroom downstairs." I looked up at him, water dripping from my chin. I blinked slowly, making my eyes look confused. "I am sorry, Jason. I got lost. I was looking for the stairs." He stared at me for a long, tense moment. He looked at the cabinet behind me. Then he looked back at my face. He shook his head with disgust. "You are losing it, old man. Get downstairs before you break something." He grabbed his briefcase from the bedroom and stormed out. I waited until I heard the car start again. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I was not losing it. I was just getting started. Tonight, the playing field would finally be even. The dining room was set for a coronation. Jason sat at the head of the long mahogany table flanked by 4 venture capitalists who looked like they measured human worth in stock options. The air smelled of truffle oil and aged beef, a scent that made my stomach turn, given that I was forced to sit at a small folding table in the corner like a naughty child being punished. I picked at my food, keeping my head down, listening to Jason weave his web of lies. "Gentlemen," Jason announced, raising his glass of red wine. "Friday is not just a market opening. It is the beginning of a new era. Our IPO is projected to debut at $40 a share. We are not just disrupting the sector. We are demolishing it." The men murmured their approval, their eyes gleaming with greed. They did not know that the financial reports Jason had sent them were creative fiction. They did not know that the company's liquidity was non-existent, drained to pay for Jason's gambling debts and this very mansion. I knew because I had read the forensic accounting report on my encrypted phone in the bathroom 10 minutes ago. I watched Jason basking in their adoration. He looked powerful. He felt invincible. He needed to feel that way to keep the wolves at bay. I decided it was time to feed his ego a little more, to make him feel so superior that he would never suspect the knife was already at his throat. I lifted my silver spoon. My hand was steady, but I forced a violent tremor into my wrist. I let the spoon slip from my fingers. It hit the rim of my porcelain soup bowl with a loud, sharp clang that rang through the room like a gunshot. Then it clattered onto the hardwood floor, spinning noisily before coming to a rest. The conversation at the main table died instantly. 5 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Jason slammed his wine glass down. Wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth like blood. "Jesus Christ, William," he shouted, his face twisting into a mask of pure annoyance. "Can you not do one simple thing without ruining it? It is just soup. It is not rocket science." I shrank back in my chair, hunching my shoulders to look smaller, frailer. "I am sorry. Jason," I stammered, making my voice crack. "My hands. They just slipped." "I will pick it up. Leave it," Jason commanded, pointing a finger at me like a weapon. "Do not touch it. You will probably knock over the table next." He turned back to his guests, rolling his eyes theatrically. "You see what I have to deal with. It is like living with a toddler, a senile, clumsy toddler." The investors chuckled, a dry, heartless sound. They looked at me with pity mixed with contempt. To them, I was just a piece of decaying furniture, an obstacle to their pleasant evening. "I am so sorry to interrupt your meeting, gentlemen," I whispered, looking down at my lap. Jason huffed, straightening his tie. "Just eat your dinner in silence, William. Or better yet, go to your room. We are discussing the future of industry here, not that you would understand a word of it." I nodded obediently. I kept my eyes on my plate to hide the cold, hard satisfaction burning in them. He thought he was displaying his dominance. In reality, he was displaying his character. He was showing these men exactly who he was, and soon, when the house of cards collapsed, they would remember this moment. They would remember that the man they trusted with their millions was a man who bullied an old pensioner over a dropped spoon. Let him have his moment of power. It would be his last. I excused myself from the table, mumbling about my bladder. Jason waved his hand dismissively without even looking at me, too busy laughing at his own joke. I walked out of the dining room, my spine stiffening with every step away from that toxic gathering. I entered the guest bathroom and locked the door behind me. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run full blast to create a wall of white noise. Only then did I pull the encrypted phone from my pocket. Leonard picked up on the first ring. "I did not need to say hello. Talk to me, Leonard," I whispered. My eyes fixed on my own reflection in the mirror. "Tell me it is not as bad as I think." There was a pause on the other end. A heavy silence that told me everything I needed to know. "It is worse," William Leonard said, his voice crisp and professional, but laced with an undertone of grim urgency. "We cracked his private ledger 5 minutes ago. The Phoenix Trust. The one you set up for Sarah and the grandchildren. It is gone." I gripped the edge of the sink so hard I thought the porcelain might crack. "What do you mean gone?" "That trust had strict withdrawal limits. He forged her signature," Leonard replied. He created a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Sarah's Medical Care. He has been funneling the money out for 2 years, claiming it was for her psychiatric treatments. He has drained over $4 million, William. There is less than 10,000 left in the account. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. He had not just stolen money. He had stolen my daughter's future. He had used the lie of her insanity to rob her blind. But Leonard was not finished. And the house, William. The deed you saw in his office is a forgery. He mortgaged the property to the bank 3 years ago. But that was not enough to cover his gambling debts. 6 months ago, he took out a second mortgage with a private lender, a loan shark operation out of Jersey. If he misses one payment, they do not foreclose. They come to collect in blood. I looked at the water swirling down the drain. It was the perfect metaphor for what Jason had done to our family. He had built a life on quicksand, and he was dragging Sarah down with him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not just about teaching him a lesson anymore. This was a rescue mission. If I did not act immediately, Sarah would be left homeless, penniless, and liable for millions of dollars in debt she never signed for. Freeze everything. I ordered, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Contact the bank. Contact the private lender. Buy the debt. I want to own every single cent he owes. By Friday night, I want to be the only person Jason Black answers to. Consider it done, Leonard said. And William, be careful. A rat is most dangerous when it is trapped. I hung up and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the old man in the mirror. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Jason thought he was playing a game of chess. He did not realize I had just bought the board, the pieces, and the building he was sitting in. I dried my hands, unlocked the door, and walked back to the dining room ready to play my part in his final act. The stack of legal documents hit the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. It sounded like a judge's gavel sealing a death sentence. Jason stood over me, his tie loosened, and his eyes wild with a mixture of exhaustion and manic energy. He pushed a gold fountain pen toward my chest. It was an expensive pen, likely bought with money he had stolen from my daughter's trust fund. Sign here, he demanded, his voice tight. And here. And initial the bottom of the last page. I picked up the papers with trembling hands. I adjusted my reading glasses, taking my time, letting the silence stretch until I saw a vein throb in his temple. I pretended to struggle with the legal jargon, squinting at the words, but my mind was reading them with the precision of a laser scanner. It was a petition for involuntary guardianship. But buried on page 4, under a paragraph about medical necessity, was the real goal. Authorization to liquidate real estate assets, specifically the 10-acre plot in Vermont that Sarah's grandmother had left her. It was the last thing she owned that he had not touched. It was her sanctuary, and he wanted to sell it to cover his tracks before Friday. I do not understand, Jason, I said, my voice quavering. Why do I need to sign this? Sarah is not a child. Can we not wait until she feels better? Jason slammed his hand on the table, making the vase shake. She is never going to get better, William. How many times do I have to explain it to your thick skull? She is mentally incompetent. She is a danger to herself. This paper just gives me the legal power to manage her affairs so I can pay for the best doctors. He leaned in closer, his shadow falling over me. Unless, of course, you want me to stop paying for her care. I can make one phone call and have her transferred to the state ward downtown. I hear the basement cells there are very cold this time of year. The threat was clear. He was holding my daughter hostage to get my signature. I looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. I let my lower lip tremble. Please do not do that, I begged. I will sign. I just want her to be safe. Good, he hissed. Then stop wasting my time and write your name. I gripped the pen. I hesitated, letting the nib hover over the signature line. I acted like an old man terrified of making a mistake. In reality, I was calculating. If I refused, he would panic and do something rash. If I signed, he would think he had won. He would think he had the golden ticket to sell the land and pay off his debts. He would relax, he would let his guard down. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote William Harrington. But I did not write it with my usual bold, sweeping strokes. I wrote it shaky and uneven. And I made a subtle change. I used the middle initial J instead of T. To a casual observer, it looked valid. In a court of law, it was worthless. It was a forgery committed by the person signing it under duress. There, I said, sliding the papers back to him. Is that all? Jason snatched the documents up. He scanned the signature quickly, too desperate to notice the error. Perfect, he said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. You finally did something useful, old man. Now go to bed. I have real estate agents to call. He walked away, clutching the papers like a prize, unaware that he was holding nothing but a confession of his own greed. I was pretending to polish the silverware in the dining room, but my eyes were fixed on the kitchen. Sarah was standing at the sink, washing vegetables. For the first time in months, she was not swaying on her feet. Her movements were precise. The fog in her eyes had lifted thanks to the vitamins I had swapped for her poison. She was even humming a soft melody under her breath. It was a sound of hope. But in this house, hope was dangerous. Amanda walked in. Her heels clicked on the tile like a ticking clock. She stopped abruptly when she heard the humming. She stared at Sarah's back with suspicion. She walked over and grabbed Sarah's arm, spinning her around. Sarah did not stumble. She stood her ground and looked Amanda directly in the eye. You seem very alert today, Sarah, Amanda said, her voice cold and calculating. Usually by this time of day you are drooling on the sofa. Did you forget your medicine? I took it, Sarah answered. Her voice was clear. It did not have the thick, heavy slur of the sedatives. I took exactly what Jason gave me. Amanda narrowed her eyes. She did not like this. She preferred Sarah broken and compliant. A lucid Sarah was a threat. A lucid Sarah could testify. Amanda leaned in close, her face inches from Sarah's. She smiled, but it was a smile that promised pain. Maybe the dosage is too low, she whispered. Or maybe you are just pretending to be better. It does not matter, really. Because Jason and I have been talking. We think your condition is getting worse. We think you are becoming a danger to others, especially to your daughter. Sarah went rigid. Her hands gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard her knuckles turned white. Do not talk about my daughter, she hissed. Amanda laughed. She enjoyed finding the weak spot. She twisted the knife deeper. We think a boarding school is too nice for the child of a lunatic. We are filing paperwork to have her moved. The state orphanage system is full of wonderful disciplinary programs. She will grow up with strangers. She will forget she even had a mother. And you will be locked away in a padded room, unable to do anything about it. I saw the change in Sarah instantly. The mother bear woke up. A primal rage flooded her face. She reached for the heavy kitchen knife lying on the cutting board. Her breathing became ragged. She was going to attack. She was going to silence this woman right now. If she did that, it was over. The police would come. Jason would have the proof he needed, that she was violent and dangerous. We would lose everything. I could not speak. I could not blow my cover. I stepped into the doorway. I made a sharp sound, clearing my throat loudly. Sarah's eyes darted to me. I held her gaze. I did not blink. I shook my head almost imperceptibly. My eyes pleaded with her. Wait, trust me. Not yet. For a terrifying second, I thought she was too far gone in her anger to see me. But then she took a deep breath. She released the handle of the knife. She lowered her head and let her shoulders slump, mimicking the defeat Amanda wanted to see. Please, Sarah whispered, forcing a tremor into her voice. Please do not take my baby. I will be good. I will take more medicine. Amanda smirked, satisfied with her cruelty. That is better. Keep cleaning. And if I hear you humming again, I will call the social worker immediately. She turned and walked away, leaving Sarah shaking with suppressed rage. I went back to polishing the silver, my own heart pounding against my ribs. We were walking on a razor's edge. But Sarah had passed the test. She was ready for the final act. By 5 o'clock on Friday evening, the villa had been transformed into a stage set for a billionaire's fantasy. Delivery trucks arrived one after another, unloading mountains of white orchids and cases of vintage champagne. The air smelled of money and desperation. Jason was running around like a manic director, making sure every napkin was folded perfectly and every light was dimmed to the exact right setting. He was sweating through his undershirt because he knew that tonight was his last stand. If these investors did not sign the checks, his house of cards would collapse by Monday morning. I was standing in the kitchen trying to stay out of the way of the catering staff when Jason stormed in. He was holding a bundle of cheap red fabric. He threw it at my chest. "Put this on William," he barked. "The valet service is short one man. You are going to work the driveway, park the cars, keep the keys safe, and for God's sake, do not scratch anything." I unfolded the fabric. It was a polyester vest with gold buttons. It was the uniform of a servant. He wanted the man who once owned half the commercial real estate in Manhattan to park cars for his friends. He wanted to reduce me to a background character in his moment of glory. I did not argue. I put on the vest. I buttoned it up over my beating heart. It was tight and itchy, but I wore it like armor. Then the kitchen door opened and Sarah walked in. My breath caught in my throat. If my vest was insulting, her outfit was a crime. Jason had forced her to wear a maid uniform. It was an old-fashioned black dress with a white apron that looked like a costume from a bad play. It was too big for her thin frame hanging loosely off her shoulders. The fabric was frayed at the hem. She looked like a ghost from another era. She looked broken. Jason clapped his hands together, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Perfect," he said, looking her up and down. "You finally look the part, Sarah. No more pretending to be the lady of the house. Tonight, you are just the help. And remember the rules. No talking to the guests. Keep their glasses full. And if you spill a single drop, you will sleep in the shed with the garden tools." Sarah lowered her head. "Yes, Jason," she whispered. She did not look at me. She was playing her role perfectly. She was the beaten wife, the crazy servant, the invisible woman. But I saw her hands. They were not trembling. They were clenched into fists at her sides, hidden by the folds of her apron. Jason checked his reflection in the oven door. He fixed his bow tie. He thought he was arranging a perfect tableau of his power. He thought he had put us in our places. He did not realize he had just arranged the actors for his own execution. I walked out to the driveway to wait for the first luxury car. I adjusted my red vest. I was ready to serve. But I was not serving drinks. I was serving justice. The line of luxury sedans stretched down the driveway like a parade of vanity. I had parked 10 cars already. My back was screaming in protest and the polyester vest was clinging to my sweat-soaked skin. Then the main event arrived. A vintage silver Rolls-Royce rolled to a stop right in front of the entrance. It was a car that whispered power rather than shouted it. This was the guest Jason had been sweating over all week. This was Arthur Morgan, the man whose signature could save Jason's company or bury it. Jason did not just walk out to meet him. He practically ran. He pushed past me so hard I nearly stumbled into the gravel. He looked frantic. He smoothed his hair and fixed his smile into a rictus of desperate charm. He opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce himself, not trusting me to do it. "Mr. Morgan," Jason said, his voice cracking slightly. "What an honor. Truly an honor. Truly and trente. Thank you for coming." An older man stepped out. Arthur Morgan was 75, but he stood with the posture of a general. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He had eyes that had seen everything and respected very little. He leaned on a silver-headed cane not because he needed it, but because it made him look dangerous. I knew that cane. I gave it to him 20 years ago when I promoted him to partner at my firm. Jason was buzzing around him like a nervous fly. Please come inside. We have the finest champagne on ice. I want to introduce you to the board. They are dying to meet the legend. Arthur did not move. He stood still on the driveway. He looked at the sprawling house. He looked at the ostentatious decorations. Then he looked at Jason. His expression was unreadable. Nice house, Arthur said. His voice was deep and gravelly. It must cost a fortune to maintain. Jason beamed, puffing out his chest. It is a labor of love, sir. Nothing but the best for my family. Success demands a certain standard of living, do you not agree? Arthur did not answer. Instead, he turned his head. He looked past Jason. He looked directly at me, standing by the fender of his car in my cheap, ill-fitting valet uniform. Jason noticed the distraction. He snapped his fingers at me. William, he barked. Do not just stand there gaping. Park Mr. Morgan's car. And be careful. This vehicle is worth more than your entire life's earnings. He turned back to Arthur with an apologetic smile. I apologize for him. He is a little slow. We try to give jobs to the unemployable. It is our way of giving back to the community. Arthur ignored Jason completely. He looked me right in the eye. For a second, the air between us crackled with decades of history. I saw a flicker of shock in his eyes, seeing his former mentor dressed like a servant. But Arthur was a professional. He composed himself instantly. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a salute. It was a promise. I touched the brim of my cap. I nodded back. Very good, Arthur said, turning back to Jason. Lead the way, young man. I am very interested to see how you run your ship. Jason looked like he had won the lottery. He guided Arthur up the stairs, chattering endlessly about synergy and growth. He did not see the look Arthur cast over his shoulder. He did not know that the man he was trying to impress was here on my orders. He thought he was walking into a negotiation. In reality, he was walking into a courtroom, and the judge had just arrived. Jason clapped his hands again. The sound cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a whip crack. He pointed to the heavy silver tray on the sidebar. It was loaded with crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. It weighed at least 20 pounds. He looked at Sarah. He did not see his wife. He did not see the mother of his child. He saw a prop. Start serving, he ordered loud enough for the nearby investors to hear. And try to smile. You look like a funeral mute. Sarah stepped forward. Her old shoes, which were 2 sizes too big, shuffled on the expensive rug. She lifted the tray. I saw her arms tremble under the weight, but her eyes remained fixed on the floor. She walked into the center of the room. It was like watching a lamb walk into a den of wolves. The guests fell silent as she passed. These were people who had attended her wedding 5 years ago. These were people who had eaten at her table. Now they looked at her with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. I stood in the corner near the kitchen door, gripping a napkin until my knuckles turned white. I heard the whispers starting. They were soft at first, then grew louder, like the buzzing of flies. Is that Sarah, a woman in a sequined dress, whispered behind her hand. My God, she looks awful. Look at her hair. It is like a bird's nest. I heard she lost her mind, her husband replied, taking a glass from the tray without even looking Sarah in the eye. Jason said she had a breakdown. Drugs, I think. It is so sad that he has to keep her around like this. He is a saint for not putting her in an asylum. Jason was loving it. He moved through the crowd like a ringmaster. He stopped Sarah near a group of potential buyers. He put a hand on her shoulder. It looked affectionate to the untrained eye, but I knew he was digging his thumb into her collarbone. "This is our little helper," Jason announced with a fake sympathetic smile. "We try to give her simple tasks. It helps with her therapy, keeps her grounded." "Right, Sarah." He waited for her to agree. He wanted her to publicly validate his lie. He wanted her to admit she was broken. Sarah stopped. She looked up. For a second, she locked eyes with Jason. The drugs were gone from her system. The fog had lifted. In that moment, Jason should have seen the fire burning behind her gray eyes. He should have seen that the woman standing before him was not a broken doll, but a ticking bomb. "Yes, sir," she whispered, lowering her head again. "Whatever you say, sir." The guests chuckled nervously. They found it charming that the great Jason Black was so benevolent to his mentally ill wife. They drank his champagne. They laughed at his jokes. They did not notice that the woman serving them was memorizing their faces. She was not serving drinks. She was marking targets. And as she turned to walk toward the next group, I saw her spine straighten just a fraction of an inch. She was ready. Sarah approached the inner circle where Arthur Morgan held court. She was walking a tightrope. One wrong move and Jason would send her to the asylum. But she was not afraid anymore. She saw Amanda sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa near Mr. Morgan. Amanda was swirling her drink, looking bored. She tapped her foot against the floor. I knew that look. It was the look of a cat about to toy with a mouse. As Sarah drew closer, Amanda shifted her weight. She waited until Sarah was committed to the step. Then, with a quick, subtle movement, she extended her leg. It was the exact same move she had used the night before. She expected the same result. She expected Sarah to fall. She expected a humiliated mess on the floor that she could laugh at. But this time the stakes were different. Sarah saw the foot. I saw her eyes flick down. In that split second, she had a choice. She could stop. She could step over it. But Sarah did not stop. She let her foot catch on Amanda's heel. She pitched forward. But she did not just fall. She launched the tray. It was almost graceful. The silver platter left her hands and sailed through the air. It did not hit the floor. It did not hit the rug. It collided squarely with the chest of Arthur Morgan. 5 crystal flutes shattered against his tuxedo lapels. Vintage champagne exploded outward like a golden geyser. It soaked his silk shirt. It dripped down his tailored trousers. It splashed onto his polished shoes. The sound of breaking glass silenced the entire room. The string quartet stopped playing. The chatter died instantly. Sarah hit the floor hard, landing on her knees. But she did not cower this time. She stayed down, her head bowed, waiting for the explosion. Jason froze. His face went from a flush of excitement to a deathly pale gray. He looked at Arthur Morgan dripping with alcohol. He looked at the ruined tuxedo. He saw his IPO, his reputation, and his freedom dripping onto the carpet. "Oh my God!" Amanda shrieked, jumping up. She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah. "You stupid, clumsy cow! Look what you did! You ruined Mr. Morgan's suit!" She looked at Jason, her eyes wide with panic, trying to distance herself from the disaster she had caused. "I saw her trip over her own feet, Jason. She is so unstable. You really should not let her around people." Jason did not hear her. He was staring at Arthur Morgan. The billionaire stood perfectly still. He slowly took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped a splash of champagne from his cheek. His expression was unreadable. It was the calm before a hurricane. Mr. Morgan, Jason stammered, his voice trembling. "I am so sorry. I do not know what to say. She is sick. She is not herself. I will pay for the suit. I will pay for everything." Arthur looked at the wet stain on his chest. Then he looked at Jason. "You will pay," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh yes, you will most certainly pay. But I do not think a dry cleaning bill is going to cover this." Jason turned on Sarah. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a murderous rage. He took a step toward her, his hands curling into claws. "Get out!" he roared. "Get out of my sight before I kill you!" He was about to lose control completely. He was about to strike a woman in front of 50 witnesses, and that was exactly what we needed. I stepped out from the valet stand, my fists clenched, ready to intervene. The trap had been sprung. Now we just had to survive the snap. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a gunshot. Jason did not look at the ruined tuxedo of his most important guest. He did not look at the shocked faces of the board members. His eyes were locked on Sarah, who was kneeling on the floor amidst the broken glass. The vein in his forehead was throbbing like a worm under his skin. He had snapped. The facade of the charming businessman had finally cracked completely, revealing the violent abuser underneath. He took 2 long strides toward her. He raised his hand high. It was not a gesture of discipline. It was a swing meant to break bone. It was the unleashed rage of a narcissist who had just lost control of his perfect world. Sarah flinched, closing her eyes and bracing for the impact. She made herself small, waiting for the pain she knew so well. I did not think. I did not calculate. My body remembered what it was to be a protector long before my mind made the decision. I dropped the valet ticket I was holding. I crossed the distance between the pillar and the center of the room in a blur of motion. The polyester vest felt tight across my chest, but my muscles were coiled and ready. Just as his hand began its downward arc toward my daughter's face, I reached out. My fingers closed around his wrist. The sound of flesh hitting flesh was sharp and loud. His hand stopped inches from Sarah's cheek. The force of his swing was absorbed entirely by my arm. I did not stumble. I stood planted on the floor like an oak tree. Jason froze. He looked down, expecting to see a security guard or a police officer. When he saw me, his eyes widened in confusion. He tried to yank his hand away. He expected the weak grip of a senile 72-year-old man. He expected me to crumble. But I did not budge. My grip was like a steel vise. I squeezed harder, digging my thumb into the pressure point on the inside of his wrist. Jason gasped in pain as the circulation to his hand was cut off. He stared at me, and for the first time I saw true terror in his eyes. He realized something was terribly wrong. He pulled again, using his full body weight, but I held him fast. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I straightened my back. The slouch I had faked for 2 days vanished. The trembling in my hands disappeared. I lifted my head and looked him directly in the eyes. I let the mask fall. The confused, helpless old man was gone. In his place stood William Harrington, the man who had crushed competitors far more dangerous than this cheap suit-wearing thug. My eyes were not cloudy anymore. They were sharp, clear, and burning with a cold, deadly fire. I saw Jason swallow hard. He looked at my hand crushing his wrist. Then he looked at my face. He realized he had not been tormenting a helpless victim. He had been poking a sleeping dragon. I leaned in close so only he could hear the death in my voice. I think that is enough, Jason. If you ever raise a hand to her again, I will break it off at the elbow. Let go of me, you senile old fool, Jason screamed. His voice cracked with a mixture of pain and humiliation. He twisted his body, trying to break my grip. He looked like a trapped animal thrashing against a steel trap. He kicked at my shins with his polished shoes, but I did not budge. I did not sway. The arthritis I had complained about for 2 days seemed to vanish. My hand was a shackle of bone and muscle. I squeezed harder. I wanted him to feel the strength of the man he had underestimated. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own sins pressing down on his wrist. The room was deathly silent. The only sound was Jason's ragged breathing and the creak of the floorboards under my feet. 130 guests watched with bated breath. They saw the valet attendant holding the CEO hostage. But as they looked closer, they began to see something else. They saw that the valet was standing taller than the CEO. They saw that the old man was not shaking with fear, but vibrating with controlled fury. I leaned in. My face was inches from his. I spoke clearly. My voice was not the raspy whisper of a grandfather. It was the deep, commanding baritone that had silenced boardrooms in New York for 40 years. It was a voice that did not ask for permission. It was a voice that gave orders. "Enough," I said. The word cut through the air like a gavel strike. "The charade ends here, Jason." Jason stopped struggling. He stared at me. His eyes darted over my face, searching for the weak old man he had bullied. He searched for the victim he had mocked in the cellar. He did not find him. He found a predator. He found a man who had built empires and destroyed enemies while Jason was still in diapers. "Who are you?" he whispered. His arrogance was leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. "You are just a broke old man. You are nobody." I released him abruptly. I pushed him back with a shove that sent him stumbling into the buffet table. He had to grab the tablecloth to keep from falling, pulling a platter of oysters down with him. The crash was loud and messy. He looked pathetic. He looked small. He stood there panting, clutching his bruised wrist, looking at me with the dawn of horrific realization. "I am the man who paid for this house," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "I am the man who paid for your suit, and I am the man who is about to take it all back." I turned to the room. I did not adjust my cheap red vest. I wore it like a tuxedo. I looked at the investors. I looked at the board members. I looked at Arthur Morgan, who was watching me with a small, knowing smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced. "I apologize for the interruption, but I think it is time we discussed the true nature of this company and the true nature of the man running it." Jason scrambled to his feet. His face was purple. "Security," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Get him out. Throw him out. He is crazy. He is assaulting me." But nobody moved. The security guards looked at me. They saw something in my posture that told them I was not the one to be messed with. They saw authority. They saw power. And in that moment, Jason Black realized that for the first time in his life, he was not the most powerful person in the room. He was just a boy who had made a very big mistake. Jason was screaming like a child who had dropped his ice cream. His face was a map of panic and sweat. He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get him out!" he shrieked. "Throw this lunatic into the street! Do not just stand there! He assaulted me. He is dangerous." Two burly security guards in dark suits stepped forward. They were hired muscle. They did not know the family dynamics. They only knew who signed their paychecks. They looked at Jason. Then they looked at me. They saw a man in a cheap red vest, but they also saw a man who was standing with the absolute stillness of a general on a battlefield. They hesitated. They were paid to handle drunks and party crashers, not to fight men who radiated this kind of raw authority. "Move!" Jason yelled again, his voice cracking. "I said throw him out." The guards took another step toward me, reaching for my arms. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I locked eyes with the lead guard, daring him to make a mistake. Then a deep voice cut through the chaos like a foghorn. "Stop." It was a single word, but it carried more weight than all of Jason's screaming combined. Arthur Morgan took a step forward. He leaned heavily on his silver-headed cane, not because he was weak, but because he was grounding himself. He did not look at Jason. He looked at the guards. His expression was bored, almost disappointed. "If you touch one hair on his head," Arthur said calmly, "you will be looking for new jobs by morning, and you will find it very difficult to find employment in this city ever again." Jason spun around. His mouth fell open. He looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. Mr. Morgan, he stammered. You do not understand. This man is sick. He is violent. I am trying to protect you. He is just a senile old servant who forgot his place. Arthur Morgan finally looked at Jason. His eyes were cold and hard. He brushed a piece of lint off his champagne-soaked tuxedo. No, Jason. You are the one who has forgotten his place. Let me make this very clear. If this man leaves this room, then I leave with him. And if I walk out that door, the investment deal is dead. My check is canceled, and your company ceases to exist. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Jason looked at the billionaire. Then he looked at me. His brain was trying to process the impossible. Why would a titan of industry defend a broke old valet? Why would the most powerful man in the room take orders from the weakest? The gears in his head were grinding, but they were not turning fast enough. He was paralyzed. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. He realized with a sick feeling in his gut that the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He was no longer the master of the house. He was just a guest at his own execution. The standoff with Arthur Morgan hung in the air like toxic smoke. Jason was still staring at the billionaire, his mouth slightly open, trying to comprehend why his world was tilting on its axis. He opened his mouth to speak, to salvage the deal, to spin another web of lies. But before he could utter a word, a sound broke the silence. It was a vibration, a low, persistent buzz from the pocket of his tuxedo jacket. Then came a chime, then another, and another. In the span of 3 seconds, his phone went from silent to a cacophony of digital noise. It sounded like a slot machine paying out a jackpot, but the look on Jason's face suggested he had not won anything. He tried to ignore it. He pressed his hand against his pocket, trying to muffle the sound. He smiled weakly at the investors. Apologies, gentlemen. Popularity has its price. I will turn it off. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the device. He meant to silence it and slide it back in. But as the screen lit up, his eyes locked onto the notifications. I watched him closely. I saw his pupils dilate. I saw the blood drain from his cheeks, leaving his skin the color of old ash. It was not a text from a friend. It was a market alert. Then 10 more. Then 50. The screen was scrolling so fast it was a blur of red. I knew exactly what he was seeing because I had pressed the button to make it happen 5 minutes ago. His company stock, the one he was pitching as the next big thing, had just nosedived. A massive sell-off had triggered a panic. The graph was not a slope. It was a cliff. Jason tapped the screen frantically. His fingers were slipping on the glass. He opened his brokerage app. He gasped. It was a wet, desperate sound. The numbers were free-falling. $40 a share. 20, 10. 2. In the time it took him to take a breath, his net worth had evaporated. But the nightmare was not over. A new notification popped up. This one was from the Cayman Islands Bank. The secret account. The one he used to hide Sarah's stolen trust fund money. Access denied. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. He swiped up. He checked his local business account. Frozen. He checked his personal checking account. Frozen. He checked the credit card he had used to pay for the catering. Declined. Jason's hands began to shake so violently he nearly dropped the phone. He looked around the room. The guests were not looking at him anymore. They were looking at their own phones. The news had hit the wire. Fraud allegations, embezzlement investigation, insolvency. The whispers started again, but this time they were not polite. They were angry. "What is going on, Jason?" one of the board members shouted, stepping forward. "My broker just called me. He says your liquidity is zero. He says the company is a shell." Jason backed away. He bumped into a waiter and sent a tray of empty glasses crashing to the floor. "No," he stammered. "It is a glitch. It is a computer error. I have the money. I have it." He looked at his phone again, praying for a miracle. But there were no miracles for him tonight. There was only the cold, hard reality of mathematics. He was not just broke. He was exposed. He was naked in a room full of people he had tried to rob. He looked up, and his wild, panic-stricken eyes found mine. He saw me standing there, calm and collected. He saw the faint smile playing on my lips. And in the chaos of his collapsing world, a terrifying thought finally began to take root in his mind. This was not bad luck. This was an assassination. The chaos in the room was cut short by a new sound. It started as a distant wail rising above the storm, but quickly grew into a deafening scream. Sirens. The heavy velvet curtains by the bay windows flashed with a rhythmic pulse of blue and red light. It washed over the guests, turning their expensive evening wear into ghostly caricatures. The party was no longer a celebration of wealth. It was a crime scene waiting to be processed. Jason stopped looking at his phone. He looked at the front door. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax statue. He knew what those lights meant. He knew that the financial collapse on his screen had bled into the real world. He took a step back, knocking over a chair, but he did not seem to notice. He was listening to the sound of heavy car doors slamming shut outside. He was listening to the sound of boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The main doors to the ballroom did not just open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. A gust of cold wind and rain swept into the room, chilling everyone to the bone. But the temperature drop had nothing to do with the weather. Leonard Cole walked in first. My lawyer looked exactly as I had hoped he would. He was wearing a trench coat that was damp with rain, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain a body. He did not look like a man coming to a party. He looked like an executioner arriving for work. Behind him walked 4 uniformed police officers and 2 men in plain suits who had the distinct sharp-eyed look of federal investigators. The room went deadly silent. The string quartet had long since stopped playing. The investors and socialites pressed themselves against the walls, desperate to distance themselves from whatever was about to happen. They left Jason standing alone in the center of the room, a solitary figure on a sinking island. Jason tried to find his voice. He tried to summon the arrogance that had served him for so long. "Who let you in here?" he shouted, but his voice was thin and trembling. "This is private property. You have no right to barge in here like this. Get out. I will sue you. I will sue all of you." Leonard did not stop walking. He marched straight across the Persian rug, his wet shoes leaving dark prints on the expensive fabric. He stopped 3 feet from Jason. He did not shout. He did not look angry. He looked bored. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. He held it up. The paper was stamped with the official seal of the state court. "Mr. Black," Leonard said, his voice calm and carrying to every corner of the room. "This is a warrant for the immediate seizure of all assets and property. And this," he pointed to the officers behind him, "is a warrant for your arrest on 18 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse." Jason stared at the paper. He shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible. I have time. I have until Monday." Leonard smiled. It was a cold, shark-like smile. "You had until Monday, Jason. But then a very interested third party bought your debt. And that party decided to call in the loan tonight." Leonard looked past Jason. He looked directly at me. He gave me a sharp, respectful nod. And in that moment, Jason followed his gaze. He looked at the lawyer. Then he looked at the valet. And finally, the terrifying picture became complete. Leonard turned his back on Jason. He did not even look at the man he had just served with an arrest warrant. To Leonard, Jason was already a ghost, a bad memory that was being erased from the corporate record. Leonard adjusted the lapels of his wet trench coat and walked with purposeful strides toward the corner of the room where I was standing. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. They sensed that the center of gravity in the room had shifted. They sensed that the real power was not the man screaming in the center of the rug, but the man standing silently in the shadows. Leonard stopped 2 feet in front of me. He ignored the cheap red polyester vest I was wearing. He ignored the tray of dirty glasses on the table next to me. He ignored the mud on my shoes. He straightened his tie. He placed his heels together. Then he bowed. It was not a mocking bow. It was not a casual nod. It was a deep, respectful inclination of the head, the kind you give to royalty, or a man you would follow into hell. "Good evening, Chairman Harrington Leonard," said his voice ringing clear and steady in the deathly silent room. "I apologize for the delay, sir. The paperwork for the hostile takeover was extensive, but it is finished. You now own the controlling interest in Mr. Black's company. The deed to this property has been transferred to your holding company, and the debt has been fully acquired. We are ready for your next command." The name Harrington hit the room like a physical shockwave. I saw heads turn so fast I thought necks would snap. I heard the sharp intake of breath from the investors near the buffet table. They knew that name. Everyone in the world of finance knew that name. Harrington was not just a person. Harrington was an institution. I was the man who had built skyscrapers in Chicago and shipping empires in the Pacific. I was the man who had retired 5 years ago to a private island, leaving behind a legacy that was written in steel and gold. Jason made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He staggered forward. He looked like a man trying to read a map in a language he did not understand. He looked at Leonard, then he looked at me. He looked at the valet vest. He looked at my face. His brain was misfiring. The cognitive dissonance was tearing him apart. "What did you call him?" Jason whispered, his voice trembling. "That is William. He is a nobody. He is a broke old man. He cuts my grass. He parks my cars." I slowly reached up and took off the cheap valet cap. I dropped it onto the floor. I unbuttoned the tight red vest 1 button at a time. I shrugged it off, letting it fall onto the pile of broken glass and spilled champagne. I stood there in my white shirt and black trousers. I rolled up my sleeves, revealing the platinum watch I had hidden in my pocket all day. I looked at Jason. My posture shifted. The slouch was gone. The hesitation was gone. The tiger was out of the cage. "He is not calling me a nobody, Jason," I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated through the room. "He is addressing me by my title. You spent so much time looking down on me that you never bothered to look at who I really was. You thought you were dealing with a senile old pensioner. You thought you could starve me and mock me and use me. But you made a fatal error. You forgot to check who was sitting across the table. You were playing poker against the house, Jason. And the house always wins." Jason stood there blinking rapidly. His brain was trying to process a reality that was too big and too terrible to fit inside his head. He looked at me, and then he looked at the legal documents in Leonard's hand. He was looking for a loophole. He was looking for a way to wake up from this nightmare. But there was no waking up. The cold air from the open door was real. The handcuffs on the belts of the police officers were real. And the man he had treated like garbage for 48 hours was standing in front of him, owning the very air he breathed. "But you do not understand," Jason stammered. His voice was pleading now. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the whimper of a cornered dog. "I own 51% of this company. I am the founder. You cannot just take it. Even if you bought the debt, I still have rights. I am the majority shareholder." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I walked over to the buffet table and picked up a glass of water. I took a sip, letting him wait, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. You really did not read the bylaws of your own incorporation, did you, Jason? I said, setting the glass down. You were so busy spending the money you never bothered to track where it came from. You see, the Phoenix Fund is not just a bank. It is a private equity firm. And when you signed that second mortgage 6 months ago, the one with the predatory interest rate, you put up your personal stock as collateral. I took a step closer to him. You defaulted on that loan at midnight last night. The moment the clock struck 12, the Phoenix Fund exercised its right to seize collateral. Your shares are gone, Jason. They belong to the fund now. Jason looked sick. He swayed on his feet. Okay, he whispered. Okay. So you own the company. Fine. Take it. It is worthless anyway. But the trust fund, the money I borrowed from Sarah's account, I will pay it back. I just need time. I shook my head. You still are not listening. You think I am the one you need to beg. You think I am the Phoenix Fund. But I am just the manager, Jason. I retired 5 years ago. I passed the ownership of the entire portfolio to a single beneficiary. I put everything I built, everything I own into a trust for the one person in this world I actually care about. I turned slowly and pointed to the woman standing by the wall. The woman in the ridiculous maid uniform. The woman with the frayed apron and the tired eyes. Meet your creditor, Jason. I said, my voice soft but deadly. Meet the chairman of the board. The Phoenix Fund belongs to Sarah. Every dollar you borrowed came from her. Every cent you stole was hers. You were not the master of this house. You were living on her charity. You were begging for extensions from the very woman you were kicking down the stairs. Jason slowly turned his head. He looked at Sarah. He looked at his wife. But he did not see the victim anymore. He saw the person who held his life in her hands. He realized with a jolt of pure horror that he had been slaving away to impress investors while treating the actual owner of his universe like a servant. The irony hit him like a physical blow. He fell to his knees, not out of sorrow, but out of the crushing weight of his own stupidity. He had made the queen scrub the floors of her own castle, and now the queen was looking back at him, and her eyes were dry and cold as ice. The financial ruin was just the opening act. The final curtain was about to fall, and it was going to be heavy. Leonard stepped aside, and a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward. He carried a sleek, metallic medical case. He did not look like a lawyer or a policeman. He looked like a man of science. He looked like a man who dealt in absolute truths. He placed the case on the table right next to the ruins of the oyster platter. He clicked the latches open. The sound was sharp and precise, like a scalpel cutting through skin. He pulled out a medical file and a vial of dark red liquid. Jason looked up from his knees. "Who is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "Is this another accountant?" The man adjusted his glasses. "I am not an accountant, Mr. Black. My name is Dr. Evans. I am the chief of forensic toxicology at Mount Sinai, and I have been Mr. Harrington's private physician for 20 years. Dr. Evans held up the vial. The light from the chandelier caught the dark liquid, making it glow. He turned to the police officers and then to the silent crowd. He spoke with a cold, clinical detachment that was far more terrifying than any shout. 48 hours ago, Mr. Harrington provided me with a sample of the medication you were forcing his daughter to ingest. We also managed to obtain a hair follicle sample from Mrs. Black earlier this evening. The lab ran a rush analysis. The results are not just concerning. They are criminal." Jason tried to stand up, but his legs would not support him. "That is a lie," he stammered. "She is sick. She has paranoid delusions. The doctors prescribed those pills. I was just helping her. I was just a good husband." Dr. Evans opened the file. He pulled out a sheet of paper covered in complex graphs and chemical structures. He did not look at Jason. He looked at the police captain. The substance found in these pills is not FDA-approved medication. It is a homemade compound, a cocktail of high-grade hallucinogens mixed with a paralytic agent usually found in veterinary euthanasia drugs. It is designed to mimic the symptoms of schizophrenia while simultaneously degrading the victim's motor functions. The room gasped, a collective sound of horror that sucked the air out of the ballroom. The guests looked at Sarah standing by the wall in her maid uniform. They looked at her trembling hands. They realized suddenly that she was not crazy. She was being systematically poisoned. Dr. Evans continued, his voice driving the final nail into Jason's coffin. The blood toxicity levels indicate that she has been ingesting this poison for at least 2 years. It causes memory loss, confusion, and extreme compliance. But the most dangerous side effect is organ failure. If she had continued on this regimen for another month, she would not be in an asylum. She would be in a morgue. Jason shook his head violently. No, that is impossible. You planted it. You are framing me. Dr. Evans closed the file with a snap. The compound has a unique chemical signature. Jason, we traced the precursors. They were purchased on your credit card, the same one you used to buy your mistress her jewelry. We have the receipts. We have the shipping logs. And now we have the blood work to prove it. He looked down at Jason with pure disgust. You were not treating her illness. You were manufacturing it. You were slowly murdering the mother of your child to get control of her trust fund. The word murder hung in the air. It was heavy and ugly. The investors who had been worried about their portfolios 5 minutes ago were now looking at Jason like he was a monster. They stepped back, giving him a wide berth. Even Amanda, the mistress who had been so cruel, slowly backed away, her hand covering her mouth in horror. She wanted to be a rich man's wife, not an accomplice to homicide. Jason was alone on his knees, surrounded by the wreckage of his life and the undeniable proof of his own evil. Jason was finished. He was a ruined man kneeling on the floor. But Leonard was not done clearing the house of vermin. He turned his attention to the woman standing near the velvet curtains. Amanda was trying to make herself invisible. She was inching toward the exit, hoping to slip away into the night before the handcuffs came for her too. She thought she was just an innocent bystander. She thought she was safe. "One moment, Ms. Vance," Leonard said, his voice cutting off her escape route. "We have one more presentation. It is not an IPO projection. It is a character study." Leonard tapped a key on the laptop that was connected to the massive projection screen behind the stage. The screen flickered to life. It was grainy footage from a wide-angle lens. I recognized the angle immediately. It was the camera I had hidden in the smoke detector in the kitchen. The image was clear enough. It showed Sarah on her hands and knees cleaning up broken glass. It showed Amanda standing over her holding a glass of wine. The audio was crisp. Every person in the room heard Amanda's voice dripping with venom. "You stupid, useless cow. Look what you did." They saw her kick Sarah. They heard the slap. They heard her laughing about sending Sarah's child to a state orphanage. The video played on a loop. The slap, the laugh, the threat. It echoed through the ballroom like a nightmare. The guests turned to look at Amanda. Their expressions changed from shock to pure revulsion. They saw the monster behind the makeup. "That is a lie," Amanda screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "It is deep-fake technology. They doctored it. I never did that. I love Sarah. I was trying to help her." She looked around the room, searching for an ally. She looked for anyone who would believe her performance. Her eyes landed on a tall, distinguished man standing near the back of the room. He was wearing a dark suit and holding a glass of water. He had been silent all night, standing in the shadows of the investors. "Richard," she gasped, rushing toward him. "Richard, tell them I am a good person. Tell them this is a setup. We have to go home. The kids are waiting." The man named Richard did not move. He did not reach out to hold his wife. He looked at the screen where the video of her cruelty was still playing. Then he looked at her. His face was a mask of cold fury. "I saw the invite, Amanda," Richard said, his voice low and shaking with suppressed rage. "Mr. Harrington's lawyer sent it to my office this morning. He told me I should see how my wife spends her evenings. He told me I should see who she really is." Amanda froze. "Richard, please. It is not what it looks like." Richard stepped forward. He closed the distance between them. "I trusted you," he said. "I left our children with the nanny so you could come here and support your boss. I thought you were working. Instead, you were destroying a family. You were abusing a sick woman. You were planning to steal a child. You are not the woman I married." Richard spat the words out. "You are vile." Amanda reached for his arm. "Honey, please listen." Richard pulled his arm away violently. Then he raised his hand. The slap was quick and sharp. It was not the heavy, brutal blow of an abuser like Jason. It was a slap of discipline, a slap of shame. It turned her head to the side and left a red mark on her perfectly made-up cheek. "Do not touch me," Richard hissed. "Do not come home tonight. Do not come near the children. I will have the divorce papers ready by morning, and I will make sure you never see a dime of my money again." He turned his back on her and walked out into the rain without looking back. Amanda stood there alone, clutching her cheek. She looked at Jason kneeling on the floor. Then she looked at me. She realized she had lost everything. Her lover was bankrupt. Her husband was gone. Her reputation was destroyed. She sank to the floor, sobbing not for her sins, but for herself. The house was finally clean. The ballroom was quiet now except for the sound of the rain beating against the glass. The screaming was over. The denials were finished. There was only the heavy, suffocating weight of the truth. I looked down at Jason. He was still on his knees, huddled on the Persian rug like a broken child. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, searching for a shred of mercy. He found none. I took a step closer until the toe of my polished black Oxford was touching his knee. I looked down at his feet. He was wearing the same bespoke Italian leather shoes he had worn 2 nights ago. They were cleaned now, polished to a mirror shine, but I could still see the mud in my mind's eye. I could still see the dark stain they had left on my daughter's shoulder. "Nice shoes, Jason," I said, my voice low and conversational. "Handcrafted in Milan. Calfskin leather. They cost $1,200. Jason blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "What?" he whispered. "What does that have to do with anything?" I crouched down. My joints popped, but I did not wince. I wanted to be on his eye level. I wanted him to see the disgust in my eyes up close. 2 nights ago, you walked into this house and you wiped those shoes on Sarah's dress. You used the mother of your child as a doormat because you were worried about getting mud on the rug. You valued a piece of carpet more than her dignity. You treated her like dirt because you thought you owned the shoes, and you thought you owned her. I stood up slowly, towering over him again. But here is the problem, Jason. You do not own those shoes. You paid for them with the Platinum credit card linked to the Phoenix Trust. You bought them with money meant for my grandson's college tuition. You bought them with money meant for Sarah's medical care. I turned to the police captain standing nearby. "Captain, according to the asset seizure warrant, everything purchased with embezzled funds is now the property of the state or the victim. Is that correct?" The captain nodded, his face grim. "That is correct, sir. It is considered evidence of the crime." I looked back at Jason. "Then take them off." Jason recoiled. He pulled his feet back. "You cannot be serious," he stammered. "I am barefoot underneath. You cannot make me walk out of here without shoes. I am deadly serious, I said, my voice hardening. And not just the shoes, the suit, the tie, the shirt, the watch, the cufflinks, even the socks. Every single thread on your body was bought with stolen money. You have been walking around in a costume paid for by the woman you abused. And the show is over. I snapped my fingers. Leonard stepped forward holding a large plastic evidence bag. He held it open, waiting. Take them off, Jason, I ordered, or the officers will remove them for you. And I promise you they will not be gentle. Jason looked at the police. He saw their hands resting on their batons. He realized this was not a negotiation. With shaking hands, he reached down. He untied the laces. He pulled off the shoes that had kicked my daughter. He dropped them into the bag. Then he undid his belt. Piece by piece, he stripped away his armor. The expensive suit jacket. The silk tie. The watch. He was left standing in his undershirt and boxers, shivering in the cold draft from the open door. He looked small. He looked pale. He looked exactly like what he was. A naked thief stripped of his borrowed feathers. He had tried to strip Sarah of her humanity. Now he had lost his own dignity in front of the very people he had tried to impress. I looked at his bare feet on the cold, hard floor. It was a poetic justice. He would leave this house exactly as he deserved, with nothing but the dirt on his soles. The security guards did not ask twice. When Jason hesitated, his hands shaking over the buttons of his shirt, the lead officer gave a sharp nod. Two men stepped forward. They moved with the efficiency of a demolition crew. One of them grabbed Jason's arm, twisting it behind his back just enough to immobilize him. The other reached for the expensive silk vest. He did not unbutton it carefully. He pulled. The fabric tore with a loud ripping sound that echoed in the silent ballroom. Gold buttons popped off and skittered across the marble floor like hail. Jason yelped in protest, but the sound died in his throat. He was powerless. The guard stripped the vest from his shoulders and tossed it into the open evidence bag. Next was the shirt. Jason tried to cling to it, tried to keep some shred of modesty, but his grip was weak. The guard peeled the white linen from his body, revealing the pale, sweating skin underneath. He was left standing in a thin undershirt, shivering as the cold air from the open door washed over him. Then came the watch, the heavy platinum timepiece that he loved to flash during meetings. The guard unclasped it without ceremony. He held it up to the light for a second, checking the serial number against the warrant, then dropped it into the bag. Clack! It landed on top of the ruined vest. Jason's wrist looked naked and pale without it. He rubbed the skin where the metal had been, as if he had lost a limb. Finally, the guards pointed down. The shoes. Jason looked at his feet. He looked at the polished Italian leather that he had valued more than his wife's dignity. He bent down slowly, his knees knocking together. He untied the laces, his fingers fumbling and clumsy. He pulled them off one by one. The guards snatched them from his hands before he could even stand back up. Then they pointed to his socks. Jason let out a sob. He peeled off the silk socks, exposing his bare feet to the unforgiving cold of the floor. He stood up. The transformation was complete. The arrogant master of the house, the genius investor, the cruel husband was gone. In his place stood a shivering man in his underwear and an undershirt, barefoot on the cold stone. The contrast was brutal. Around him, the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and white orchids. The guests were dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. And in the center of it all, Jason looked like a beggar who had broken into a palace. He tried to cover himself with his arms, crossing them over his chest. He looked around the room, searching for a friendly face. He looked at the investors he had charmed. They looked away, unable to bear the second-hand embarrassment. He looked at Amanda, but she was already gone. He looked at Arthur Morgan, who was watching with a look of cold satisfaction. The humiliation was absolute. He could feel the eyes of every person in the room burning into him. He could feel the judgment. For years, he had stripped Sarah of her confidence, her voice, and her sanity. He had made her feel small and naked in front of the world. Now the universe was balancing the scales. He was feeling every ounce of that shame. The cold floor seeped into his bones, making his teeth chatter, but it was the exposure that froze his heart. He was not just naked physically. His soul was laid bare, and everyone could see that it was rotten to the core. I watched him shiver, and for the first time in years, I did not feel anger. I felt pity. Not for him, but for the man he could have been if he had just had a heart. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed through the ballroom like the final note of a tragedy. It was a sharp and unforgiving sound. The police captain stepped forward and placed his hand on Jason's bare shoulder. He began to recite the words that every criminal dreads hearing. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jason did not look at the officer. He stared blankly ahead, his body sagging as if his spine had been removed. The cold reality of prison was finally setting in. At the main entrance, there was a commotion. 2 officers marched in, dragging a woman between them. It was Amanda. She had tried to slip out the side door during the chaos, but the perimeter was secure. She was no longer the confident mistress who had laughed at Sarah's pain. Her hair was wild and wet from the rain. Her makeup was smeared across her face in dark streaks. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. She was sobbing hysterically, begging the officers to let her go, screaming that she was just an employee, that she knew nothing. They ignored her pleas and marched her to the center of the room, forcing her to stand next to Jason. The 2 of them stood there, the architect of the crime and his willing accomplice, bound together in disgrace. Jason looked up. He realized that the law could not save him. His lawyers could not save him. There was only one person in the room who had the power to stop this. He turned his head slowly toward the wall where Sarah stood. He shuffled his knees across the cold floor, ignoring the pain. He moved toward her like a pilgrim seeking salvation. "Sarah," he croaked, his voice broken and wet with tears. "Sarah, baby, please. Look at me. It is Jason. It is your husband. You cannot let them take me away." He reached out his cuffed hands, trying to touch the hem of her frayed maid uniform. "Think of our daughter Sarah. She needs her father. Do not let her grow up knowing her dad is in prison. We can fix this. I can explain everything. I was just stressed. I made mistakes, but I love you. Please just tell them to stop. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." Sarah looked down at him. For years she had looked at him with fear. She had looked at him with confusion through the fog of the drugs he fed her. But now her eyes were clear. She looked at the man kneeling at her feet. She saw the sweat on his forehead. She saw the terror in his eyes. She saw the man who had poisoned her body and tried to steal her mind. She saw the man who had planned to throw her child into an orphanage. She did not speak. She did not scream. She simply stared at him with a gaze that was emptier than the void. It was a look of absolute indifference. To her, he was no longer a monster. He was not even a man. He was just a thing, a bad memory that was fading fast. Sarah blinked once. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned her back on him. The movement was final. She faced the wall, then turned to look at me. She walked away from him, her cheap shoes making a soft sound on the marble. She did not look back as Jason let out a wail of despair. It was the sound of a man realizing that he had not just lost his money. He had lost the only person who had ever truly loved him, and he had no one to blame but himself. The officers hoisted him to his feet and began to drag him toward the door. The nightmare was over. The waking up had begun. The flashing blue lights finally disappeared into the rainy night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and profound. The last of the police cruisers had rolled down the driveway, taking Jason and Amanda to a place where their schemes could no longer hurt anyone. The guests had vanished even faster than the police. The moment the handcuffs came out, the socialites and investors scurried away like roaches when the kitchen light is turned on. They left behind half-eaten food and overturned chairs, too ashamed to look us in the eye. Now the ballroom was empty. It felt vast and cavernous without the noise of the crowd. The air still smelled of expensive perfume and spilled champagne, but the energy had changed. It was no longer a stage for Jason's vanity. It was a battlefield where the smoke was finally clearing. I stood in the center of the room, rolling down the sleeves of my white shirt. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion hit me. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the last hour was fading, leaving my old bones aching. But it was a good ache. It was the feeling of a job finished. I looked over at Sarah. She was standing near the buffet table. She had not moved. She was looking at the empty doorway where her husband had been dragged out. She looked fragile in that ridiculous maid uniform, but she was standing straight. Her shoulders were not hunched in fear anymore. Then I heard the rhythmic tap of a cane on the marble floor. I turned to see Arthur Morgan. He was the only guest who had stayed. He stood by the entrance, his tuxedo still stained with wine, his silver hair reflecting the light of the chandelier. He did not look like a man who had been ruined by a clumsy servant. He looked like a king who had just watched a joust. He walked over to me slowly. He stopped and extended his hand. It was a firm grip, dry and warm. "You still have the fire, William," Arthur said softly. "I was wondering when you were going to burn the house down. It was a privilege to watch." I nodded. "Thank you, Arthur, and thank you for playing your part. I am sorry about the suit." Arthur waved his hand, dismissing the apology. "It is just fabric, William. It can be replaced. Dignity is much harder to mend." He turned his attention to Sarah. He walked over to her. Sarah flinched slightly, a reflex from years of abuse, but she held her ground. Arthur did not look at her frayed apron. He did not look at her messy hair. He looked her directly in the eyes with absolute respect. He took her hand in his. He did not shake it. He bowed over it, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture of old-world chivalry. "Mrs. Black." Arthur said, his voice gentle and deep. "Or should I say, Ms. Harrington? I want to offer you my deepest apologies. I watched you suffer tonight, and I did not intervene soon enough. I am sorry that you had to endure such cruelty in your own home. You possess a strength that I can only admire." Sarah looked at him. Her lip trembled. For the first time all night, the dam broke. Tears welled up in her eyes. Not tears of fear, but tears of relief. Tears of being seen as a human being again. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, but it was hers. Arthur smiled a sad, kind smile. He squeezed her hand one last time. "Rest now, my dear. The wolves are gone." He nodded to me once more, then turned and walked out into the night, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the stones. We were finally alone. The silence was not empty anymore. It was peaceful. The smell in the kitchen was not of imported truffles or vintage wine. It was the scent of roast chicken and rosemary, mixed with the warmth of baking bread. It was a simple smell, but to me, it was the finest perfume in the world. We were not sitting at the 60-foot mahogany table in the banquet hall. We were crowded around the small round table in the breakfast nook. There were no servants standing in the shadows. There were no investors judging our clothes. There was just us. Sarah sat to my right. She was wearing a soft blue sweater and jeans. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and she looked 10 years younger than the ghost who had haunted this house 3 months ago. She was laughing as she wiped a smudge of tomato sauce from my granddaughter's cheek. The little girl giggled and tried to grab the napkin. Her laughter was a sound that filled the cracks in the walls that Jason's shouting had created. I took a bite of my dinner. It was perfectly cooked. But the food was secondary. I was feasting on the sight of them. I watched the way the evening light caught Sarah's hair. I watched the way her hands moved steady and strong, no longer trembling with the side effects of poison. She was whole again. She was the mother she was meant to be before a predator tried to turn her into a victim. I took a sip of water and let my mind wander for a moment. I thought about the man sitting in a cold cell miles away. Jason had spent his entire life chasing the wrong things. He thought power was a corner office and a platinum credit card. He thought respect was something you could buy or force people to give you. He looked at a house and saw real estate value. I looked at a house and saw a home. He never understood the economics of the soul. He did not know that the most expensive thing in the world is trust, and once you spend it, you can never earn it back. He had gambled everything on a lie. He traded his wife, his child, and his freedom for a few years of pretending to be a king, and now he was a pauper in every sense of the word. He was poor in spirit, poor in friends, and poor in love. I looked at my granddaughter. She was telling a story about a butterfly she saw in the garden, her eyes wide with wonder. She did not know that her father was a criminal. She did not know that her grandfather was a tycoon. She just knew that she was safe and that she was loved. That was enough. That was everything. I glanced down at the small leather folder sitting on the counter next to me. It contained the final legal decree stripping Jason of his last parental rights and sealing the transfer of the estate. It was the last piece of paper in a long and ugly war. I did not need to read it again. The war was over. The dragon had been slain, and the village was safe. I reached out and closed the folder. The soft thud of the leather cover sounded like a final period at the end of a long sentence. I pushed it aside. I would not think about lawyers or prisons or betrayal anymore. Not tonight. Tonight belonged to the living. Sarah looked up and caught my eye. She smiled. It was a smile of pure gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we had weathered together. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked. I looked at her. I looked at the child. I felt a peace settle over me, deep and abiding. "Everything is perfect, Sarah," I said. I smiled a genuine smile that reached my eyes. I picked up my fork. The file was closed. The past was buried. I turned my attention back to the only thing that mattered: my family. This story reminds us that true power is never found in arrogance or the money we steal. Jason thought he could build a kingdom on lies, mistaking kindness for weakness and silence for stupidity. He forgot that the most dangerous wolf is often the one waiting patiently in the shadows. In the end, greed stripped him of everything, while love and integrity restored a broken family. It proves that no matter how dark the night gets, the truth will always shine through. Real wealth is not about the shoes on your feet, but the people by your side. What did you think of William's revenge? Let us know in the comments, and follow for more stories.